We'll start the meeting at that point. Welcome everyone to the Audit Committee. Andrew, could I just ask you to introduce the people that we have online, just so everyone knows who everyone is, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we've got Councillor Harper online this evening. And then from the Wokingham officers, we've got Steve Moore, who's here for the Corporate Risk Register item. We've got Graham Cadle, Assistant Director of Finance. We've got Mark Thompson, Head of Finance. We've got Catherine Hickman, Head of Internal Audit and Investigations. And then from our external auditors, we've got Helen Thompson. So I think I've covered everybody there. From Democratic Services, I've got Lucy Annie Bowker and Madeline Shopland in the room.
Lovely, thank you for that and welcome everyone. Okay, do we have any apologies?
Councillor Davies.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the minutes, there's a few actions I want to pick up in a moment from the minutes, but first, do I have approval that they're a correct record? Are there any corrections that any member wants to raise? No? Okay. So can I have a show of hands that those are a correct record, please?
Sorry, Chair, I did at one point. I was just trying to find it. In number 32, on the second page, about 2/3 of the way, talks about Mike Drake praise and presentation. There's a third line down says potentially having unqualified. It should say qualified. We'd be delighted if they were unqualified, wouldn't we?
Thank you for that, Mike. That's great. I can have a show of hands of approving those as a correct record, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Harper, sorry.
That's okay. Chair, it was just you talked about actions in the minutes, and I wondered if it would be beneficial to, as in some organisations, they have a separate table of actions so they can be tracked between meetings or across meetings. Obviously, you know, they get buried a bit in these minutes here, and it's sometimes difficult to kind of pull them out.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good suggestion. So if officers are okay with that, we'll implement that and we'll make sure we pick them all up. Okay, so can I have a show of hands of approval of the minutes of correct record? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and then in terms of those actions then, a few just quickly to pick up. So one was yours, Councillor Harper. So it was about the data regarding overall complaints that you wish to see from a longer period than had previously been provided. Do officers know, has that been provided now, or is there a reason why we haven't been able to provide that?
Chair, I know we provided information, I think it was back in August time, and it did go back to 2020, but I believe Councillor Harper was looking for something more historic than that, and we haven't provided that yet. Maybe I could take that offline with Councillor Harper to be clear as to exactly what he was looking for. Yeah,
that sounds good. Okay, thank you. And then Councillor Davies had requested more of a simplified summary on the infrastructure assets and how they are stated in the accounts. Obviously, this is quite a complex issue, and he had requested a simpler presentation. So is that something that's been provided or can be provided?
Chair, I don't think we have actually. I think what we'd provided for the previous meeting was our best stab at making it simple, and I'm not sure it was that simple or helpful. Again, maybe I could chat to the member of the committee and we could work through something that might be helpful for members.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, and then a couple of other things. So Councillor G had expressed some concern about our investments in gilts, and Graham since confirmed that we don't have investments in gilts. There was also a request on a bit more granularity in the reports for the Treasury management, so perhaps we could pick that up when we come to that item. And then Councillor Kaiser had requested the debtors report, which has now been circulated to all members. Okay, any other comments on the minutes or actions arising people want to raise? Councillor Kaiser?
Chair, I did ask that and Graham took away the action to approach Windsor and Maidenhead to see whether we could get representation on the board, as we are such a major contributor.
Graham, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I've got an update on that. Maybe I could. It's kind of set how that governance is arranged. So maybe I can just summarise the guidance and again share that with members. It's not as simple as us being a big contributor. There's some regulations around how it is. So if I could share that and maybe that will explain to members the position. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or notes on the minutes? No? Okay, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, are there any member or public questions? No. Okay, so we'll move on to our first substantive item, which is an update again on our accounts. I understand there has been some progress, particularly on the infrastructure assets side. So who's going to take this, Helen?
I think it's probably a slightly joint between myself and Graham. But I'll start. So in terms of infrastructure, obviously we had a long debate at the last meeting about the possible option of a modified audit opinion if we wanted to move the audit forward. There has been a lot of movement since then. And today, I haven't checked, but DLUC, the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, should have published laid its statutory instrument, which would create a statutory override relating to infrastructure before Parliament. And it will sit before Parliament for a period of 20-something days, which gets us very close to Christmas. If there are no comments or challenges to it, then it would become a part of the legislation and that governs the way in which the financial statements are presented. I believe that in the last 24 hours or so, SIPFA has also published its amendment to the Code of Accounting Practice that would support that statutory instrument or the statutory override. And what that will allow us to do once we've worked our way through all of the implications of that, both as audit firms and council and the council itself, will be to find a way through. Now, I would be really grateful, members, if you don't ask me detailed questions about what that way through looks like, because I've not had the chance to look at all of that information in detail, and there will be a firm overlay on that. But what I would say is that both DLUC and SIPFA have been engaging with all of the audit firms, so not just EY and the NAO and the regulator, to try and get to a resolution which which should not be challenged in terms of completing the audit. And what that will mean is that we would be able to issue an unmodified opinion, so an unqualified opinion, once we've worked those changes that will be required through the financial statements. So that's the infrastructure asset point. The second point that was delaying the audit related to the infamous pension fund letter from the Berkshire Pension Fund to allow us to complete the audit. We have been chasing the audit firm for probably once every couple of weeks since the last meeting, and we have now been promised the letter before Christmas, so we continue to wait. On the basis that we are waiting for that and the DLUC stroke SIPFA amendments that would allow us to issue an unmodified opinion, when in discussions with the council, we agreed that it would be it would be much better to have an unqualified opinion than a qualified opinion, and therefore that's why the accounts are not presented this evening, and nor is the audit results report. Our aim is to pull all of that together. And I feel like I've said this at every meeting, for your next meeting in February, so that we can conclude the 2021 audit. I should also say there is one other issue that has arisen that we are working our way through. It's nothing to do with the financial statements as such, but we received a whistleblowing allegation, and that's really all I want to say on that. But we need that's being worked through so that we would complete that in advance of issuing the opinion. Graham, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Helen. Not massively. I agree with what Helen said. It feels like we come here every 3 months and tell you next time it will be different. I think the difference this time is does feel like there's a statute coming out and some regulation which, to I think both organisations understanding, will resolve the problem for us rather than cause other issues. But until we've gone through that detail, we can't be 100% certain, which, as Helen said, we're doing as we speak. So I think we say with more assurance than we have before that by February we should be ready to provide the final accounts team.
Yeah, because we do expect that letter to come from the pension fund auditor. I think they have been slightly more definitive about this particular deadline, although they have been definitive about deadlines in the past. On that matter, it might be worth just reflecting, because the question, I suspect a question will be, how do we avoid the delays caused particularly by the pension fund letter in future? I was talking with Graham and Graham Ebers as well this week that there is the possibility of carrying out alternative procedures. So we do our own work if we can access some of the information that's held within the pension fund, and we're going to explore that option for the 21-22 accounts so that we might be in a position to be able to conclude that without the need for waiting for the letter of assurance from the pension fund auditor. So we are actively looking at ways around the position that we have found ourselves in for the last 2 years.
And similarly on that note, we are working across other Berkshire authorities to apply pressure, support the press that in the right way, because obviously it's not just us that it affects.
Okay, thank you both for that. So it does look like we can be reasonably assured that February will be ready to sign in February. Okay, questions from members, comments? Mike?
Thank you. The alternative procedures, would that be relying on actuarial figures that can be produced that basically PLCs do?
We already do rely on actuarial valuations that are produced that the council has access to. No, this is about testing the valuation of investments and getting assurance over the valuation of the investments that are held by the pension fund, more so than the benefits and liabilities side of it.
And what's the audit you've been waiting on?
The Berkshire Pension Fund audit.
So why haven't you been able to rely on the actuarial valuation?
So as I said, it's not the actuarial valuation that is the issue. The assurances that we get from the pension fund auditor give us assurances over what the pension fund does with the information that's provided by the council to the pension fund. But more importantly, their work is what gives us the assurance over the valuation of the investments that obviously form a part of the disclosure within your statements and lead to the calculation of the liability. And without that, we need to have that assurance over both the asset as well as the calculation of the liability.
That's not normally what happens to a PLC, actually. They will rely on the actuarial valuation.
I think there's a lot of changes and there's been a lot of challenge from the regulator about how auditors carry out their reviews of this, and this is our approach.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Kaiser, please.
Yes, can I just ask you, Graham, it's all over the news about Essex investment in a company that's gone pop. Are there any companies that we're invested in, such as RE3, where we either don't believe we're getting the right information, or they may have some financial issues?
Thank you, Councillor. No, to our understanding, and in the kind of, I guess, both the day-to-day monitoring and the wider financial controls, certainly the major providers, as you'll understand, we have a lot of smaller providers that we probably have less handle on, but the main providers are financially stable. What stable means, but as stable as they can be, and there's not an immediate risk at this time.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you very much. So the next item is the Treasury Management Report. So I assume this will be Graham. So obviously take the paper as read, Graham, but if you'd like to briefly introduce it, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the mid-year 22-23 update on the strategy that was agreed at the beginning of the year. You'll remember, I think at the last committee, we brought the closing 21-22 position. So the report is asking the committee to support the recommendations through to council. And you'll probably remember the dialogue last time around first recommendation where we approved, we were meeting all the indicators apart from one, which was around the level of internal borrowing. And that continues to remain higher than we'd forecast in the strategy. Again, as we, I think, explained and went through last time, that's not a negative thing. In fact, that's a positive thing. It also reflects the current context where, one of our biggest challenges is the influence and the effect of interest rate increases. So by increasing our internal borrowing, that allows us to manage the situation, and then it also reflects a delay in the capital programme and allows us to review the position going forward, which we will bring a new strategy to you in February. And we hope by that stage, working with our external partners and experts, to be able to forecast that way forward, hopefully in a time where there's a little bit more certainty about how that economic position will be.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Graham? Okay, Councillor Kaiser, then Councillor G.
Graham, looking at the report, can I just ask a question? You've transferred a lot of money across to internal borrowings from external, which makes a lot of sense with interest rates being at where they are. That obviously is not finite. That's not infinite. Basically, there must be a point where you can't do that, and it's not safe to do that. Are we anywhere near that point?
Thank you, Councillor. We're not at this stage. As you'll see from the profile. There's a profile of quite a lot of debt renewing in the next year. So actually we have a bit of flexibility going forward. We also have a level of uncertainty around our capital programme, setting next year's MTFP and the forward plan. So we are fine at the moment. As I explained, I think in the introduction, the key will now be working with our advisors, confirming what our capital requirements are going forward in the MTFP, and then realigning our borrowing and internal borrowing going forward, which, as I say, we hope to bring to, or we will bring to this committee in February. But we are fine at the moment. I think it's more about making the right decisions, depending on which way the economy goes going forward.
Okay, can I just one more question? You can now get nearly 3% on ready access accounts. Are we moving quickly enough to move money out of some of the accounts that we've got and some of the investments that we've made with brokers and people like that to get to make maximum on that, because they're pretty much risk-free investments?
Yeah, there's a balance, as you'll understand, Councillor, in terms of many of the arrangements we currently have will have default costs if we move them out. So again, we regularly meet with our external advisors and we look at what opportunities there might be to reshape and remodel. The issue at the moment is making those commitments in the long term and having the best forecast possible of whether those rates will go up and down, and not, I guess, investing money in the longer term when we may need that for internal borrowing, depending on how that capital programme is. So at the moment, yes, we're continuing. We're not experiencing opportunities at the moment, but we should do in the next few weeks and months as things firm up.
Councillor G and then Councillor Harper.
Thank you. I asked at the last meeting, and possibly another one, that we have more detail in this report. So with interest rates obviously going very high for borrowing, I had hoped to see the equivalent. I think we had Table C and Table D about 3 years ago to show us what the borrowing structure was between 1 and 2 years, between 2 and 5 years, with the interest rates and the maturity dates of those borrowings. And I'm disappointed not to see it in this report. I think it's really important for us to be able to judge performance and risk by having that information, and the same for the Treasury investments as well. I think they were Table C and D in a previous report, and I'm wondering why it hasn't appeared in this report.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I provided you some information you asked for last time, didn't I, around the rates. In terms of this report, our plan is to work with our external experts and to consider whether we bring that in for next year when we set the strategy, at which point then we can monitor as it goes through. So apologies if we misunderstood the timing of that, but our approach is to just consider that for next year. I'm sure it's not an issue, and if you've had it in the past, we need to understand that, but we do need to just make sure that giving some of that information isn't commercially sensitive as well as part of that.
Yeah, well, with respect, it's been produced before, and I don't think it is commercially sensitive. So if it were, we wouldn't have produced it before. Other councils produce it, and I specifically asked it for this meeting. I'm finding it very difficult to work out how liquid we are in terms of what we've got invested, the maturity structure of our investments. I can't see how that ties up with the maturity structure of our borrowing and the amount of borrowing we've got. For example, the risk is going to be between 1 and 2 years and between 2 and 5 years, so that we've got 69 million due to be paid off in the next 5 years. Now, if that's at a very low interest rate and we can only borrow at a high interest rate, that leads me to question whether we're going to be able to afford some of our capital programme. So I would have liked to have seen that in this report as I had requested.
Okay, thank you. We will consider that and put that into next report unless there's any issue with. I did send you some information directly around the borrowing and the rates we were borrowing, and I think the maturity dates as well. Yeah,
we need transparency, and in order to have accountability in relation to this report, and that's what I'm not seeing.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of other questions, unless anybody else wants to.
Do you want to go ahead, and then I'll come to Councillor Harper and Mike.
Oh, right. OK. So there's no comment in here about any of the changes to minimum revenue provision, or at least I cast my eye over it and I can't see the risk of that discussed here. And I would have expected to have seen that. And there is a very weird little comment, which I did send to you, I think, something about lending to the town, which completely flummoxed me. I didn't understand what that was at all. So I'm wondering what your opinion is of the risk associated with changes to minimum revenue provision, and if you can explain the comment about the town or lending to the town centre. I'll see if I can find it while you answer the first one about MRP. Thanks.
Thank you. So as I'm sure you're aware, the MRP changes have been proposed for some time. There is a lot of grey area around what they will include and what they won't include, which actually can make quite a big significant difference. In fairness, there has been a really good and wholesome consultation, which I think has led to the delay, because I think they don't want to bring this in and this have the wrong impact. So for instance, to stop regeneration and the development of areas. So we really do not know what the scheme will bring in. It has been delayed, so there certainly won't be any changes until April 2024. We are obviously working in the background to kind of understand different scenarios, but at the moment, in terms of this mid-year review of our treasury, it doesn't impact our decisions, and it doesn't impact where we are. So until we got that detail, which really will make it an impact as to how it affects us, it's very difficult to comment further, I think, as we commented last time.
Thank you. I found the bit I was looking at about a third or about a quarter of the way down, page 15. It says the net general fund financing costs of the council are forecast to remain small at 0.1 million, which is 0.1% of the net revenue expenditure. This is the result of reducing the interest charge to town centre to better reflect the actual interest costs to help maintain its movement to a surplus. Does that in fact mean that in table A, we're just shifting things from the top of table A to the bottom, or vice versa, or from one category to another? Because I really don't understand that at all.
So as the town centre scheme's business case obviously included the requirement to provide funding, and then for the return in terms of rental income, sales of properties, to repay the debt and the interest charge. When the original business case was set out, we included for a higher interest rate, i.e. that the council would charge to that equalisation fund. As the work's now getting almost to a complete stage but progressing, we've taken a detailed review of where we are and understood that actually that level of charge was higher than obviously the council was reflecting, and therefore we've changed the charges of interest to that fund to better reflect the actual costs the council incurred. So I think if there's something we should have done that review a little bit earlier and ongoing, but obviously with the complexity of the work and the funding, we're just making sure overall the fund washed its face and was turning a return and delivering. But that change now reflects a truer cost of the cost of borrowing for that town centre regeneration scheme.
Just to clarify, is that a switch between the return on community investments and the financing cost on the general fund in table A? So it doesn't actually make, because we own the town centre regeneration, I'm finding it difficult to follow.
Can I, Mark, can you just confirm for me? I think that's the case. Can you just confirm where both sides are for me, please?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I probably need to double check, and because the top line, the general fund, includes interest in MRP. So it's probably something I'd need to go away and have a look at and get back to you. But it would be, moving in terms of which line we're classifying it on. So we're still coming back to the net cost for the council would be the same.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
So we can explain where the entries are, but as you say, it's internal, Councillor. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harper next, please.
Thank you. In the report, it talks about spending less on capital expenditure this year, which I kind of, I mean, must mean that less stuff is being done, fewer projects are being done. Is there a kind of a list where we can see which projects are being deferred from one year to the next, so we can understand, what impact they have in terms of, different areas of the council?
Yeah, yes, Councillor. I think overall it reflects the council reviewing its financial position, both in revenue and capital, and reprioritising with the new administration, which projects should go ahead. So I might ask Mark to jump in again. We provide updated capital reports, which I think go to other committees, but we could provide you the links to those, which show how those programmes have moved and where they've just been deferred or where they've been taken out. I think it goes to executive, doesn't it, Mark?
Yeah, so the capital monitoring goes to the executive on a quarterly basis, and within that report we list out all the carry forwards associated with the capital programme. So the latest one would be the Q2 report, which went to October executive, which would list all the carry forwards for the capital programme, and we take account of the impact of that in our treasury management forecast for capital spend.
If I looked at the exec agenda, I could pick up that information.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. And Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Rather similar in connection with some of the discussions already on that table B, it would be useful, I'd agree, to have the rates of interest for each of the various maturities of the borrowings. I don't think it's confidential because normally you give that level of detail in the annual report. And it's quite key, I think, to know the rates that are dropping off, say 1 to 2 years, that the rates will be replaced by new borrowing. So I think that probably is quite important for the Audit Committee to know that. And also in table A, I was noticing the annual benefit to the taxpayers from the last outturn or the previous year outturn to the current forecast is down £500,000. So that's quite substantial reduction. It appears to be in the reduced contribution from the housing, local economy and regeneration. Is that to do with this internal rate you're charging that's already been discussed?
Yes,
Perhaps you
predominantly.
could comment, because it's quite a substantial
Predominantly,
difference
yes.
in forecast.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Smith.
Slightly different question, I think mainly to help me. On page 14, the last bullet point, it says the average interest rate of external borrowing for 2022-23 is forecast to be 1.56. How will that change going forwards into 23-24, do you think?
We have to work it through. It won't be as stark, I guess, as you're seeing in the economy, because obviously we've got a number of longer term loans and borrowing arrangements. Where it'll impact is the new borrowing that might come out. So it ties back to the conversation we've had before about needing to ensure we fully understand the capital requirements going forward, how much internal borrowing we use, and to understand the best time at which to borrow if we do need to borrow more money. Reflecting the current, say, blip increase in interest rates. So we'd probably, I guess, expect it might increase slightly, but as I say, most of the arrangement we've got a long term, so it probably won't have a huge effect. I haven't got a number off the top of my head, but it should remain fairly stable.
Thank you. And Councillor Kaiser.
Can I just ask, that question comes from that for me. A lot of the borrowings I get are forward funding of infrastructure, which means that will get paid as we collect SIL money and S106 money from developers. Is that right?
Some of the funding will be from those arrangements, yes. Some.
So we're not open, we're not exposed to all of it.
No.
And I'd add that that's partly why when the maturity structure shows some of those borrowings stopping in sort of 5 years, and that was designed to tie in with the receipts from town centre and developer contributions.
And of course, with the minimum, the changes on the loan, the way we pay the loans back, what that will mean is that some of the infrastructure we may have forward funded, we won't be able to do going forward. Is that correct?
I don't believe at this point that that's stuff that we could not continue with, but clearly we need to continually review any further borrowing and what rates that might be and the impact on the overall scheme.
But we do have the option not to borrow the money. That's what I'm getting to. We will be at a point where we'll be able to say, well, we don't actually need to borrow this money.
Yeah, depend on internal borrowing, etc. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor G.
I'm just looking at table A, and with the borrowings, the interest and MRP debt repayment is pretty certain, isn't it? Whereas the contributions towards financing costs are more uncertain, and the additional income over and above the contribution shown above are also uncertain. So I'm thinking, I live in West Scott, which includes the town centre, for example, and there are a lot of unoccupied buildings. And in fact, there was a trader in Peach Place that is no longer paying us rent. Their business is no longer operating there. I think in terms of comments on the table, it should be, and I have mentioned this before, it should be made clear which of these things are more uncertain, because it's all very well offsetting things, but when you've got a certain cost and an uncertain stream of revenue, then you're going to get things like the fact that the benefit per Band property goes down from 22.25 to 15.29, which is that's not particularly brilliant. It's gone down, as we know, by is it 5 in millions of pounds? Quite a lot. I'll probably get my commas wrong. So I would like to see something on there about in order to help us judge risk, about which things are certain and which things are uncertain, so that we can interpret the tables more fully.
Sorry, Maria, do you have sort of way that you would present that? Do you have a sort of suggestion? Is it literally
Just narrative to explain which is certain and which is uncertain? So the revenue streams are uncertain. It's just to help readers of the report to judge which bits they can know with more or less certainty, and which bits are subject to the vagaries of the market, if you like.
Okay. Graham, does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think we'll have to have a go at it. If we have a try and see what narrative we can add and what value, then we can certainly try to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Smith.
Page 16, the table at the top of page 16. The cash investment balances have gone from a treasury strategy of 152 down to 31. That's an enormous movement. We're happy with that, are we?
Yeah. Sorry, Mike, were you going to say something then?
I was just going to say, so that goes back to our decision around increasing our internal borrowing. So using those cash balances to fund capital expenditure as opposed to taking out external borrowing at higher interest rates in the uncertain times. So that you'll see a significant reduction in our external debt at the same time, from the strategy of 388 million to forecasting 112 million. So using our cash balances to avoid the need to borrow externally.
So it rather begs the question, why didn't we do it previously? If we're happy that 31's all we need.
There's a mixture of reasons in that the interest rate was much lower. Our funding, our borrowing portfolio was different at that point. So part of this is about, as that funding matures, it allows us to make different decisions, and also around the capital programme spend sort of profile changing as well. So there's a few factors that I think have worked in our favour a little bit to allow us to make this change at a time when the interest rates have obviously gone the wrong way. So a few years ago we wouldn't have been in this position so much because we had some of that borrowing already. We had commitments in the capital programme, and so the interest rate wasn't high, so the pressure to do that and the advantage of doing it wasn't so strong.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to move to the recommendations then. So I'd like to take all 5 recommendations and vote on that once, unless anyone has any objections to that. Okay, so let's move to the vote then. All those in favour of recommendations 1 to 5, please show. Thank you. All those against? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Corporate Risk Register review. And, oh, Andrew, you're introducing this, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I could just introduce the report just very briefly before I hand over to Steve Moore, who will take you through particularly the risks in his area. So it is less than 2 months since you looked at the Corporate Risk Register in some detail. There are no new risks that we've added, but we have taken the feedback that we got at the last Audit Committee, and we've been working on the presentation of the report itself, and hopefully we've made some positive progress in terms of the presentation. We've also looked carefully at the assessment of some of the risks, so particularly risk number 1, financial sustainability, risk number 4, the uncontrolled development, and risk number 8, climate change. We have split 2 of the risks that you saw last time, so cyber security as one risk, is now separate from the information governance risk. And we see, well, whilst the two are very closely connected, we believe separating them out will enable a greater focus on those cyber and information governance. And then again, presentationally, through the Director of Children's Services, we've decided to combine risks 5 and 11, which again, I think there was some challenge at the last Audit Committee on that particular point around SEND and the high needs block. Just a couple of other things I'd just like to say by means of introduction. The Risk Management Group, which is a group of officers representing their directorate, it meets monthly. It's done a self-assessment of its effectiveness, and you'll see in Appendix B there is an action plan of areas that the group wants to take forward in terms of improving the overall approach and framework for risk management in the council. And then finally, just to draw your attention to some benchmarking work that we've started to do. So we've done some horizon scanning, but also benchmarking, particularly across Berkshire, to provide some assurance that there are no significant risks facing local authorities elsewhere that aren't already picked up in the Wokingham Borough Council risk register. So hopefully that gives the committee some assurance that we're focusing on the right risks for this council, and we're focusing on the right mitigations against those risks. But that's all I'd like to say by means of introduction. But if I could hand over to Steve now, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Madam Chairman. So I'll be as helpful as I possibly can be, and I'll talk about the ones in more detail I can. Obviously, sit in my directorate. I'm probably more corporate in the main, and I'll just go through some of those quickly, and then obviously happy to pick up any questions at the end. And I think the main one obviously is still around financial resilience. There's still a degree of uncertainty in relation to the local government settlement that all local authorities are going to receive in the next few weeks from central government. Until that's known, it's difficult obviously for us to be sure about the sustainability of a lot of the services that we deliver going forward. And linked to that, I would add that obviously with the economic downturn we're seeing a lot of increased demand coming in the system for services. We're seeing more homelessness presentation. We're seeing all these sort of costs and system pressures continuing to rise. So, and then of course the treble whammy in relation to all of that, if you like, for want of a better term, is inflation, and I've certainly never seen that where it is now in my experience in local government. And of course, you know, we've got contracts that are going up in cost by 10 or 15 or even more % for the same services, and our ability to raise money doesn't go up at the same rates, and demand in the system goes up, then obviously it's quite predictable to the challenges that we find ourselves going forward. So I think it's quite right that financial resilience is one that continues to be at the absolute top of the list, can give assurance that it is the #1 conversation that's certainly going on from an officer point of view, and we're working very, very hard to mitigate these risks as we move forward. The second one I would touch on is the local plan and uncontrolled development. The local plan is still progressing. It's still at regulation 18 stage. We've gone out to consultation and still plan to move forward to Reg 19, which is our third option for sustainable development going forward. We have been very successful and continue to be very successful in defending or putting up defences in relation to uncontrolled development coming in the system. And so our planned strategic approach to regeneration and development still remains strong. You'll be aware there's a lot of conversation around planning reform going on. It has been for quite a while now across government in relation to the National Planning Policy Framework, which effectively is the hierarchy of planning policy nationally and how we set planning nationally going forward. And of course, as that materialises and comes forward, it will be clearer in relation to what that means to the local plan as it emerges. Climate change has shifted up from a risk point of view. Mainly, again, I'd say that is linked to a lot around the financing. To be green, to be net zero does cost and can cost, and we do require funding, obviously, to come in from central government as well in relation to delivering against some of our aspirations. And again, there is potentially uncertainty due to the economic situation. And the other thing to add to that is, of course, the council itself can't deliver a carbon neutral Wokingham. It needs its partners, businesses and other providers to play their part as well. So yes, we have a degree of influence, but we don't have total influence in relation to how others can operate. So which is why that still remains high. I'd like to touch on inward migration, and I'd like to thank our fantastic staff, the way that they've responded to supporting the Homes for Ukraine scheme over the last few months, as well as obviously all the generous residents that have opened their doors and agreed to host. It's been a tremendous effort from everyone, and we are doing all we can, obviously, to support people fleeing the war zone in Ukraine, and obviously integrating them into our borough and making sure that they can be sustained within our community. But of course, there are risks. Hosting arrangements won't go on forever, and we expect to see an increased presentation of people coming to us for housing and such like as hosting arrangements do start to finish. So that's a risk we're very much alive to. I also attended a meeting on behalf of the Chief Exec with the Minister who leads on asylum, Robert Jenrick. I think it was last week, it might be the week before, talking about the wider asylum situation that's going on at the moment. You'll be aware there's a national strategy to utilise hotels. We have one in the borough, as you know. It's not a sustainable situation, and one again we're alive to. And there was absolute recognition that the Home Office need to work a lot closer with local government and other partners to make sure there's a more strategic approach in how we deal with this challenge. And I quote the Minister on that. That's not my words. So that's positive, and we need to build on that conversation to ensure, again, we are alive to the potential challenges and increased demand that may come into the system due to the current asylum situation. And finally, I pick one up on public transport. It's also extremely topical, and in particular buses. Members, I'm sure, are all aware that behaviours on public transport have changed quite considerably since the pandemic. There's a lot more home working, and obviously the reliance on public transport is not what it was before. Buses have struggled more so than the rail network. Our patronage has been increasing. I meet regularly with the Chief Executive of Reading Buses. I met with him yesterday with members and our excellent Community Transport Manager, Rebecca Brooks. And we meet regularly to talk through these issues and challenges. And patronage is now up to about 81%. And it was well below that before. So it is recovering. It's starting to plateau, though, at that figure. So we're watching that very closely. There's still uncertainty about the Department for Transport continuing funding to bus providers beyond March of next year. In fact, it's highly likely that probably funding will be reduced or the model will be changed. But the real challenge, and apologies, it is a bit hot off the press, so you don't have it within your report, is actually driver retention. And this is the main problem and the challenge that we're seeing in Wokingham at the moment. So it's extremely difficult to retain and recruit bus drivers. It's a national problem at the moment. You remember many months ago, there was a shortage of HGV drivers. There was a big push to get more people driving HGVs, getting food into supermarkets and so on and so on. Well, as a direct result, that resulted in a lot of people leaving the bus driving market and obviously earning more money in the HGV market. And that is still a challenge for the bus providers, as it is for Thames Valley buses and Reading buses. But be assured, we work very closely with our partners and our providers. As I say, I mentioned earlier, I met with the Chief Executive of Reading Buses yesterday. Really positive conversations. We're working very hard together. We're looking at our skills employment opportunities. We're trying to reach out to our communities and assist wherever we can to make sure we get more bus drivers available so we can sustain the timetables and the frequency of these essential services, which of course is just not about buses. I always try and define it and say it's about life, actually, because it's how people get to work, it's how fair paying school children get to school. So it's education, it's economic and recovery, and also how many people in the borough get to health facilities such as hospitals. So they really are critical. So there's a probably more than brief introduction. Hopefully that's been helpful for you, and I'm happy to pick up any questions I can.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Steve. That's great. Right, questions. Okay, I've got Councillor Kaiser, Councillor Smith, and then Mike, please.
Good evening, Steve. Good to see you back and healthy again. Just a couple of questions. They're not trick ones. But Reg 19, we have total control over that. What's the target date for it?
Well, we're still, we've now gone through so just so members know, Regulation 18 is where we go out and we seek views based on options, we collate all those views, and then we bring forward preferred options to Reg 19. At the moment, Councillor, I believe it's still on, possibly around for next summer. That's really when it should be ready coming forward. I think a lot will depend, and what I will say is where national policy ends up landing. There's a lot of discussion at the moment around the National Planning Policy Framework and what that means to planning policy, because obviously our local plan needs to be in what's commonly known as general conformity to national policy. And if there's a significant change in national policy, obviously that needs to be reflected in our local policy, i.e. the local plan. But at the moment, I would anticipate that will still be on for the summer next year.
So it's for summer this year, because it's gone back. It means we've got to find another 1,500 homes, because we're now talking about 2025 for inspection.
Again, I wouldn't like to comment on the calculations, but yeah, for examination, I think probably be pushed to get into an examination for 2024, back end of 2024. John, I would have thought. Obviously, that's dependent on the planning inspectorate of when they can actually hear the examination. So we are at their mercy on the timetable, but it would take a good year, 18 months beyond when we were a Reg 19 position to when we would get into examination.
Okay.
So can I just ask? I didn't understand the beginning part of that conversation, so I've really no idea what this Reg 19 is.
Okay,
so I think we need to realise we're not planning experts, and also people out watching aren't.
Absolutely. Okay. So okay, I'm not a planning expert, but trust me, I feel like one over the years I've been working around local plans. So effectively, regulation. So there's different stages of a local planning process. Regulation 18 is where you've got your options. So these are all the sites we could develop on, and we go out to consultation in a number of different ways, and we ask for people's opinions. We get lots of obviously comments from developers and members of our communities and all sorts. We have a duty to cooperate element as part of that process, so we have to liaise with our neighbouring planning authorities as well, and a duty to cooperate statutorily, and we do that. Then effectively you get all of the feedback in, it's assessed, and then you come forward under Regulation 19 stage, which is effectively saying, well, we had all of these options, and actually based on the feedback and our sustainability assessments, that's our preferred option. So it actually takes a range of options and said that's our preferred one. And that's what Reg 19 is. And obviously that's what most people are interested in, because that'll actually be saying these are the areas we're going to develop on in simple terms.
Can I just finish? The important thing with Reg 19, I think, is that it becomes material at planning appeals, because you've identified what you're going to be doing in the future. And at the moment, because we haven't done that, it can make it difficult to protect ourselves. And following on from that is, where are we with the 5-year land supply at the moment?
Yeah. And obviously those two questions, John, your subjects are very much closely linked, because obviously if you don't have a Regulation 19 position, then obviously developers and speculative developers, once we move below a 5-year land supply and we are just below the 5-year land supply at the moment, then obviously it gives them more weight to come in and submit development that members may not want to see. But we are good at defending that, because what we have done, we have a very good track record of delivery, and we do go to appeal and we win most of those appeals. But you're right to raise it, but the longer the process goes on, the more the 5-year land supply erodes, then the greater the risk. And that can happen, yes.
Do you think the 5-year land supply should be a separate risk shown in the register?
I'd say it was one of the main risks of the local plan, John. So maybe it probably needs to come out greater within the narrative of the risk.
Yes.
But we could list it. We could list it, because that is obviously where we do then get the challenge in from developers, and of course they can then go through an appeal. So this is what I keep saying. I know the local plan is always very contentious, but to not have a local plan is far more risky than having a local plan, because effectively you are open to speculative development. But it's a good point. Maybe for next year we need to look at maybe just having that as a separate item, because that is one of the absolutely critical issues. Yeah.
Okay, can I just, one last point? We all talk about financial resilience within that. It really, we're talking about inflation to a certain degree. Within that, there is the cost of materials that we really haven't any control over. And what's concerning me is not so much the materials, and as I say, there's not much we can do about that. If a brick costs this, it costs this, and there's not much we can do about it. My concern is salaries. We're seeing a lot of people now in the public sector coming out on strike. I mean, say 10% salary increase in this council would be £7 million. Is it something that you look at as a separate issue, or is it all lumped together?
But with construction, or just generally, John?
No, with the salaries. The salaries are my main concern here, because
I mean, obviously inflation is pushed up by those main factors, and whether it's ourselves operating as an organisation, of course, with our own pay increases or whatever it is, obviously that pushes up bigger slices of the cake of the money we've got to spend. In the world of construction deliverability, there's no doubt about it, construction costs will be increasing because salaries are going up, materials are going up. And where that becomes relevant is when we start talking about things you've been talking about today, like SEAL and Section 106 and development contributions, because effectively a developer will always argue about a viability assessment and what they can afford to pay. And of course, if the cost of construction goes up and the sales values, if you like, for want of a better word, don't go up at the same rates, then obviously potentially they will turn around and say, well, there's not as much profit on it, so therefore my contribution to you should be lower. So there are economic impacts within all of this. So John, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that the S106 agreements that we've got do not take into consideration inflation at 10% plus. So if we were, for instance, going to build a community centre or a school, we probably, by the end of next year, we'd probably only get 50% of that. And that's really going to put pressure on the council's capital programme.
Yeah, and I heard you talk about the capital programme earlier on, and it's an absolute relevant point, because obviously, you know, again, I'll make this up, but if it costs £10 million to build a school 2 years ago, it's probably going to cost £13 million now. So if it's only 10 million in the capital programme, then there's a £3 million pressure before you start, which is one of the reasons why obviously we're looking at the capital programme, the affordability of the capital programme, not just now, but going forward as well. So it's really profiled. And obviously you'll be aware in my area, Place and Growth, we've probably got the biggest chunk of the capital spend in the council, whether it be highways or housing or whatever it might be. So it's certainly something that gets a lot of my attention.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. Actually, following on from that last point, should the capital programme then have its own risk assessment at this level?
I'm not sure. I think Graham, I know you're still on the call. I don't know if you're there. The capital programme itself, should it have its own risk? I mean, obviously you've been listening. We've been talking about obviously cost of construction going up and borrowing and all that sort of thing. So it's something we're alive to, as I said. But I'll defer to you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So within the bids, we would expect a level of contingency. So there's a factor there, although as Steve's just outlined, I guess that contingency level that's required now has moved quickly. We also do have a corporate contingency in the capital programme. So there's a fairly significant figure, one liner, which is to pick up any programmes that might struggle. They can request additional costs. So it's not future proof. But we certainly have a level of resilience in our overall capital programme to hopefully pick up where pressures arise as they come through. The monitoring that I think Mark referenced earlier on as well includes that forward plan for the project. So we'd hope very much that when we speak to project leads on those capital programmes, we'd pick up any pressures as early as possible, and we'd report that through that monitoring that comes through to executive. So yeah, a number of things in place, hopefully, that minimise the risk as much as they can.
I think my concern was thinking about that and what you've just said, the contingency there for the one or two programmes that get into trouble. All of our programmes are in trouble with increased costs of both materials and wages. So it's not just one or two that we need to bail out. They're all going to go up.
Yeah, the contingencies, I couldn't tell you the amount off the top of my head, but it's quite a significant. It's in the millions. So we would hope across all the programmes, and bearing in mind the review that I think again both Mark and Steve have outlined already, that we could pick up. And we will have to understand that if pressures grow, it may affect future capital abilities, I guess, to do further programmes going forward. But at the moment, we're comfortable that there's a level of contingency that as far as our knowledge is in place and is covering those programmes that are in train.
Okay, thank you. That wasn't actually what I was going to ask. On the front page in the summary, you say the council's top corporate risks are budget, financial resilience and health and social care reform, but then you list another 5. I just wondered if they're in hierarchical order, what is the hierarchy? Is it cost? Is it the consequences of the risk being realised, or what?
There's a number of factors. Obviously, maybe Andrew will touch on a bit more detail. The ones I've touched on there really are the ones that really relate to my department, councillor. So that's why I haven't put obviously adult social care. Of course, I'm alive to that and the reforms and so on and so on. What I would say is, if you look at the reg rated chart, it tells you quite clearly on there about the top right hand corner will be the highest risk one and a number. So where you've got financial resilience, that will be top right hand corner, because that's the main risk we focus on, and then so on. So anything clustered in the top right hand corner will be the higher risk, and then as it moves more into amber and into green, it then starts to reduce from a risk point of view. So I'd focus visually on that graph to show you where the risks are. But finance and will be critical. Obviously, there's reputational risks that are factored into that as well. But at the moment, it would be wrong for me not to say that finance and economic challenges would be the number one factor. So, and that's the same for adult social care reform. It's about money. It's about affordability.
Okay, and talking about uncontrolled development, somebody who knows a lot more about planning than I do suggests that whenever you're trying to finalise a local plan, all the developers try it on anyway. Are we seeing something different from what would be normally expected from setting up a local plan?
No, developers make their business by developing, don't they? And for those of you that have never been to a local planning examination process, if ever you want a few days fun, then please go to one. They are public forums. And I can tell you that developers do turn up en masse, and they will put their cases forward about why we should be using their land, with their barristers and legal representatives in tow. And making strong arguments against what we're proposing if obviously we're not in favour of what they're saying. So it's normally, that they will make formal representation at regulation 18 stage, and many have done that. That would be considered and will form an opinion in regulation 19 stage, and then ultimately the planning inspectorate and the examiner will make a final judgment at the local plan examination based on the evidence that are here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have Mike next and then Councillor Harper?
Thank you. I think I mentioned at the last meeting, I quite like this presentation of the risk. I might nick it for myself, my own board actually. But I have a general point. I notice, I think probably in all risk areas other than one, the current risk is higher than the target risk. And I wonder whether that was an issue with maybe the target risk is unrealistic. If it is realistic, what are the management plans to reduce the current risk down to the target?
Perhaps I could take that one, Chair. So the concept is that through the mitigating actions, they would get us down to the appropriate level, the risk appetite that we've got for any particular risk. I think it's probably fair to say in terms of where I think we are as an organisation in terms of more maturity, I think we've got a little bit of way to go to make those more precise connections between the current assessment and the desired position. But I think we've sort of demonstrated over the last year or two in particular that there is a growing connection between the two, if that helps.
Yeah. Are there any timescales? Do you expect to get down to the target risks with, I don't know, 2 years? Made a number up.
Well, I think it varies risk by risk. You'll see on some of the mitigating actions against some of the risks that they're quite long term, whereas one that's very close to my heart, voter ID, which is a risk that we've got that's coming up next year, so we need to have it implemented for May 2023. We've got some very sort of short-term actions, and I'm quite confident that those actions that we've got in place will get us to the desired level of risk on that. So I think the short-term ones are probably easier than the long-term ones that in some senses are going to be with us for years, if not decades.
Yes, by their nature, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Harper?
Thank you, Chair. We've had recently some presentations on the website replacement project for the borough. It's a large project, doesn't appear to have a great deal of time to deliver before the deadline, I think, which is July. Is this on the risk register? I mean, it's not on this register. Is it on a departmental risk register?
Yeah, it will sit on a directorate risk register, that particular risk. And one of the things I meant to say in terms of my introduction is the risk management group is liaising with all the directorates at the moment in terms of the individual directorate risk registers. So we'll be able to, in the new year, to give you more visibility of the key risks and talk about the escalation process from a directorate risk register up to the corporate risk register. But yeah, what you see at the audit committee is, if you like, the most significant impactful risks for the council as a whole in terms of achieving its objectives. But it would be wrong of me to say that's the only risk that we've got in the council. And we've got some directorate risks, we've got some very detailed individual project risks. So there's a whole hierarchy of risk across the framework of risk management in the council.
Chair, can I ask if we can have the risk associated with the website replacement project brought to the audit committee? I mean, if this project goes badly wrong and fails to deliver, there's reputational risk to the council, there's functional risk for our residents who won't be able to carry out certain functions that they're currently doing online. It's a significant risk to the council. I think we ought to have it to this committee.
Yes, through you, Chair, I'd be happy to do that. And I would point out that the information governance risk within that, at least in part, is the website replacement project, particularly from an accessibility perspective. But yeah, very happy to bring something more detailed back to the committee at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just ask a couple of quick questions and then I'll come to Councillor G and Councillor Smith. So just on the financial risk, so you mentioned horizon scanning earlier, Andrew, and obviously clearly the financial risk is an area of massive shift across the whole sector. And we have seen a few Section 114 notices. So a couple of questions on that. Just thinking about the short term, relatively short term, is there an update for members on the budget work that's going on and any progress in plugging the hole that was reported to us previously in next year's budget? Where are we at with that? And then secondly, what is the nature of the lobbying that we're doing on the local government settlement? And what are officers' feelings about the likelihood of a positive outcome for us, bearing in mind the settlements that we have had previously, or lack of settlements, should I say?
I don't know whether Graham or Steve is perhaps best placed to take that. I would like to make a comment at the end as well about section 114 and what we're planning to bring to the committee with regard to that.
So I can, Graham, you do a bit of a double X if that's okay. So I think it's fair to say there's always a lot of lobbying going on, Madam Chairman. I know that members, current executive, draft many letters about funding and fairer funding, and I think it's commonly known. I think we're one of the lowest funded local authorities in the country for the settlement that we get, and so I think that's a significant challenge for us. What I would say is I think the council's obviously been very prudent over the years and tried to obviously look at its resources in a very careful way. So what I would say is someone that has worked for many local authorities, I wouldn't say that Wokingham is in that top 10, 20, 30 local authorities that are in real risk. I wouldn't say that at all. What I would say is there'll be, I think you saw something on the BBC or was it Sky or something the other day that there's about 1 in 6 local authorities nationally that are really under real threat of not being able to balance their budgets. So that's quite significant when you put that into context. So there's a lot of focus on the local government settlement and what that's going to mean. And so, of course, we're looking very carefully at that. We are also, certainly from a corporate leadership team perspective, looking at a range of different assumptions, which you'd expect us to do. So if A, B or C happens, what does that mean to any pressure going forward to 23, 24, 24, 25, and how best are we going to mitigate that? So I can assure you, give you total assurance that the majority of our time at the moment is spent around this situation, and it's not going to stop. It's only going to accelerate going forward for the foreseeable future. So there will be some challenges. There's no doubt about that. I don't think we're in as I say, a bad position. I believe, and Graham, please correct me, I think there was a talk about a budget update going to ONS. Was it December, January? I can't remember. Yep. Sorry. So maybe you can cover that part.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, to back up what Steve says, obviously I've been here a year now, but I've been at a number of other councils, and I think it is fair to say, whilst there's huge challenges, the financial position, the level of reserves, I think puts Wokingham in a decent position to be able to face those challenges and to plan forward to get to a sustainable position. But that will require, I think, some difficult decisions about which services we can afford to what level going forward. And as Steve said, that's the work that I think CLT and tiers below are doing in detail at the moment. You'll be aware that we've taken a number of options and reports through a whole range of overview and scrutiny committees. And as Steve says, the last one this year is, and I haven't got the date in front of me, but I think it's week commencing the 19th of December, where we'll bring the latest ideas. I think that includes members' ideas from the previous and what impacts of that. And then there's another overview and scrutiny committee in January, where again we'll bring further ideas. So we're continuing to look at options. It's not a desperate position, but it is a position that requires further options and I guess political decisions around which services to what standard are affordable in the longer term.
And if I could just add, SITFA a couple of months ago, they produced a report for local authorities, which is a sort of lessons learned report from those councils that have declared a Section 114 notice. And I think in terms of sort of good financial governance, there are things that we can take from those authorities. We're currently going through that report, and I'd like to propose through you, Chair, that we bring an assurance report back to this committee in the new year that shows the controls that we've got in place in Wokingham that make us different than those councils that are referred to in the SITFA report.
Yeah, thank you. That would be excellent. Yeah. Okay, so Councillor G next, please.
Yeah, just talking about reserves, I'm very concerned about the the safety valve programme that we're involved in. I think it's spelt incorrectly just on 24. It's called safety value, but I think it's safety valve. This is for councils who've got the 20 highest deficits in the country, isn't it? So it's not a good position to be in. And it does look like we have to take pretty quick action about reducing this deficit at the end of 22-23. So would we have to cover all of that deficit of 16 million, or is it a longer programme so that we can cover it? As long as it looks like it's going down and we've got a plan, then it's all okay. And finally, I think we've got a new school or new SEND provision. Will that be part of the plan?
Sorry, can I just come in there? Sorry, before you answer, just to be clear. So when you're saying deficit, you mean in the dedicated school grants rather than overall, just so that everyone's clear.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, the DSG. Again, I'll do my best. I do not want to mislead you in any way. I will do my best to answer your question. Again, Graham, I don't know if you can assist with this one, if you're still there. Obviously, DSGs nationally are a huge challenge to local authorities. I don't know what they add up nationally. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. We do know we've got an increase in SEND demand, and obviously that's linked to the safety valve programme. My understanding as part of the bid, Graham, is that you have to produce a plan to cover the gap, not actually write off the total gap in one go. So, you know, it needs to be a robust plan of reduction. Yes, and your final point there, Councillor, about, yes, we do have another SEND school going on, but I actually chair a group called the Strategic Growth and Asset Board, when I chair the officer group, and then that goes into an executive group, which effectively is about looking at our need, our pipeline of need, looking at our assets, and trying to make sure that we can have that pipeline of need there going forward. And we know as part of that process that we do, on top of the provision you referred to, there is still a need for more SEND provision across the borough for us to be able to meet our statutory responsibilities. I think, as I say, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm privy to many of the conversations, but Graham, you know, maybe a little bit more about DSG and the funding mechanism of safety valve. So,
can I add Steve's caveat, because I know a bit more, but I don't want to give committee incorrect information. The first point I'd make is it's not just for the 10 highest local authority deficits. It's for all councils, and we're certainly not in the top 10. I'm just looking, and Surrey's deficit, for instance, is £100 million. So again, as we've said about the wider financial context, Wokinghams is not dreadful, but looking at the forward plan, that number gets significantly worse quite quickly. So there's a real challenge. The opportunity safety valve brings us is if we can define what those activities, services are that can get us back to a balanced position, and the council will probably have to invest some of that money. The government will part fund and invest the rest to get the position back to balance. So my understanding is the work is ongoing, including dialogue with government around how our scheme would work, what we'd need to put in to make it work. But I think it's fair to say that it's quite an important thing if the council can take advantage to try and get it back into a balanced position with government support, because the numbers are going the wrong way, and quite a challenge at the moment because of the number of children and some of the other pressures coming through.
Yeah, I was just reading from the DFE update, which says that Safety Valve is dealing with the top 20 local authorities who have the highest deficit. So we're not in the top 10, but it could easily be in the top 20. Given that this is so critical, and it could lead to a Section 114 notice if we have to cover all this deficit from reserves, which we can't do, would it be useful, Chair, do you think, to have the Director of Children's Services or possibly the Executive Member for Children's Services at a meeting, unless this looks like it's really under control by February?
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Is that possible? Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. Okay, Councillor Smith, please.
A couple of very minor points. On page 27, where there's the list of various risks, there's a helpful index, except number 8 and 9 around the wrong way. It's just a presentational thing. I wanted to just pick up on something that Councillor Harper said. He asked for information about the website, to the risk assessment. If it doesn't include the CRM replacement, it should also include the CRM, please. The two are very, very closely linked.
Okay, I'll pick that up. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. The CRM replacement is being progressed. I only know that because I've seen the capital programme and the procurement decision that went through our board last month. So CRM replacement is part of that.
Having been involved in 2 CRM replacements in large organisations, both of which didn't go quite according to plan, one of them quite disastrously and wasted over £1 million. It's potential to go wrong, as Councillor Harper said about reputational damages, etc. And it is intended to speed up and make more efficient our relationship with our residents. But the only other question I was going to ponder was the cyber attack risk and also the informational governance risk. Both have executive lead for finance and the relevant director of finance as the risk owners. I would have thought it would have come under different division or different responsibility.
Yes, if I could take that away, I think you're correct that I think there are 2 separate executive members responsible for those 2 risks, but I will take that and correct that for the next report.
Well, and also officer, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Maher.
Thank you. Just something you were saying earlier on about reviewing the financial position. I'm glad that you're reviewing it regularly and you're bringing lots of options to different committees and so forth. But what I didn't get from all that was any kind of real understanding or a feel for what a good, bad or medium position is in terms of the variations, the assurance and the confidence that you have behind that. Reviewing is one thing and looking at options is one thing, but trying to get to some sort of a position on the different options that we work from or work to is something that we should be trying to achieve. And so my question really is, when will we get into that position? Because trying to get some sort of an idea of that financial situation, whether it's good, bad or medium or whatever it is, with a degree of confidence is where we really need to be.
I'm happy to pick that up, Madam Chairman. If you so again,
Please do, yeah.
Yeah. So that there are a range of different mitigations we are looking at. Graham alluded to earlier on about choices, challenges. You know, let's be honest. Local government's finding itself in a very unprecedented position here as a public service body. You know, it's a piece of elastic. Demand's going up, and costs are going up. Money's going down. So you've got to have a degree in economics to work out that that's a challenge, and things are going to have to sort of be discussed and decided. What we're trying to do at the moment is, even on things like inflation, myself and Graham, we had a chat today, didn't we? Good sir. So about inflation and getting a handle on that, because it depends what indices contracts are linked to. It depends when their anniversary dates are. It doesn't all happen in April. It can happen in November for certain contracts, so bigger contracts, smaller contracts, different indices, and the key drivers behind that. So it is quite a complex position. What we are doing, though, is please be assured we do have a good handle on those different scenarios and an idea of what gap A, B, and C could look like. We're also alive to the fact there's probably other risks that might be coming down the line that we're not even talking about yet in any forum. So again, we are horizon scanning as much as we can. Like I mentioned earlier on about the work with the Home Office. We're talking to at the moment with the Minister about the approach the government is taking on the asylum hotels. Now, the asylum hotels ultimately are not financially sustainable, so there's going to have to be, and this is not my term, this is a government term or whatever term, a dispersal plan. There's going to be a dispersal plan of how you move out of the hotels and find more sustainable accommodation for people. Well, I would struggle to see how that's not going to hit the doorstep of local government at some point in time from a housing presentation perspective. So straight away there's a risk potentially there. You could see an increase in homelessness and then an increase in temporary accommodation and so on and so on and so on. So we are alive to these things and we're thinking about what could happen as well as the things that we know are going to happen. But we have to do it in a sequenced order. So we've had the autumn statement. The next announcement is the local government settlement, which I think is about 2 or 3 weeks, Graham.
Yep.
That will give us some certainty in relation to how much money are we going to get. We can then forecast that against our assumptions we've been made and then be more certain about what challenges and mitigations we're going to have to propose to put forward to members and the wider council about balancing our books going forward. And depending on the size of the gap will depend on the severity of the choices we're going to have to make and take. But I assure you, there is a list of proposals at the moment that have been through the scrutiny cycle, and directors have gone to certain scrutinies and spoke about proposals and savings and opportunities and fees and charges and all sorts. And so we are exploring all angles, but we do have to operate within our budget envelope. That is a non-negotiable. If you don't operate within your budget envelope, that's when you're in 114 territory, and that's where we obviously will not go. So those decisions are taking place, as I mentioned earlier on, are probably taking the bulk of the conversations that have been taking place over the last 6 months. And as every week goes on, they're accelerating and they're accelerating and they're accelerating. So I can give you assurances it's got a lot of attention, but once we know what the settlement is, once we know where we are with the inflation, because where are we going to be in 12 months' time with inflation? I don't know. People can guess, they can say, oh, it'll come down, it'll go up, or whatever it's going to do. But the truth of it is, we don't know. So trying to forward plan, do you forward plan pessimistically, optimistically, or realistically? Well, you do all three. And that's what we're doing as part of our appraisals at the moment. So I'm sorry, Councillor, if that has not given you a direct answer, but I hope it gives you some assurance that this scenario planning that's going on at the moment is looking at all of these different options.
If I may just add a little bit to what Steve's saying, Chair, in terms of timeline, we take the medium-term financial plan through to committee in February. So the next steps are further ideas and the updated petition to ONS mid-December, and there is a further ONS committee in January, which again will have other ideas, and then that will start to transpire into committee report into February. To give you further assurance, I think the level of reserves we have is healthy with challenge, and they're allocated, but it does mean it gives us a little bit of time with some of those options to be able to invest a little bit to deliver them, and also to time them so that services don't fall over where I've been before. Some of the changes have had to be very, very quick because they don't have that comfort of a level of reserve. So I think that gives an opportunity to whilst there's difficult decisions, to time them and implement them hopefully safely and effectively.
Yeah, I was going to have a follow-up to that, but I think you've more or less answered it really. So what I appreciate the fact that you are keeping on top of it and doing your sensitivity analysis and so forth, really. What I was really maybe getting to was this gap A, B, and C. Is it likely that in maybe February we'll get a chance to look at the different scenarios to be able to see your thought process in terms of where you think we're going, and then the impact of that on our reserves and especially on the services, because I think that's quite crucial, really. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments on that? No? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We will move on to internal audit. Thank you, Steve, for joining today. Internal audit. So members will notice that the report looks a little different to what we've had previously. So there's a simpler presentation and also some increased detail on the recommendations outstanding that we'd previously requested at this committee. So thanks to Catherine and the team for those changes. Catherine, over to you for a brief introduction to this report, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. This item 42 is on pages 51 to 70 in the agenda pack, and it presents the Q2 Internal Audit and Investigation Progress Report. That's a summary of all the work of the team as at the end of September. As the Chair has mentioned, following the discussions at the Audit Committee in September, where members requested more detail in the reports, I've changed the format and presentation, which I hope members will find helpful, and also incorporated your requests for additional information. But I think this is something that will evolve further over time, and I'm happy to take any other thoughts and comments for future reports. I was going to very briefly just take you through the report and pick out the key highlights. So if I can turn your attention to page 57 and the table on that page. This is a list of all the Council's key corporate risks as at the end of September. Obviously, we're not resourced to audit all of those risks every year, but those being covered this year are annotated with progress on completing those particular audits in the audit plan for this year. And this is to demonstrate that internal audit are focusing on key risks to the Council. And again, this will build over time. Overall, we are on track to deliver the audit plan. There were 2 financial audits that are key to feeding into the Head of Internal Audit opinion. That is in relation to financial resilience and compliance with the SIP for Financial Management Code, and also financial management, which falls into Corporate Risk 1. I'm pleased to say that work has recently commenced in scoping that work, and that will continue through Q3. At the last Audit Committee, there was also discussion about Treasury management, and about that had been deferred from the in-year review of the internal audit plan. Just to update you, another audit in the plan that had been requested by management is no longer required. So I've been able to programme in Treasury management in its place, and that will be undertaken in Q4. In terms of follow-up activity, I know members are particularly keen to have assurance that internal audit agreed actions are not building up over time. And the intention of the graphs and the tables in the report are to be able to give you an overview whether that is happening or not. In the audit team, we keep an action tracker where we detail all the concerns that we identify during the course of our audits. That's the high, medium and low risk concerns. And through monthly updates with the chair of the committee, I'm sharing the action tracker with her for the high risk concerns. So she's got oversight that activity is happening in those areas. For category 3 and 4 audit report opinions, there was one in Q1, and that was a debtors report that was discussed at the last meeting. There's no new category 3-4 reports in Q2. But again, the chair is asked to see all the category 3-4 reports, and the debtors one is now being disseminated to every member of this committee. In terms of fraud and irregularities, the work to the end of Q2, we concentrated on the National Fraud Data Matching Initiative. I reported the main results in my annual reports at the end of last year, and we've just completed the remaining 2 data sets in terms of payroll and creditors. We're about to start a shorter exercise as well this year on some smaller, well, on a smaller number of data sets. I've included in the report the results of a proactive empty property relief exercise that was completed in Q2, and those results will feed into the new homes bonus. And we've also undertaken significant work on COVID grants to make sure all assurance work has been completed for BICE by their deadlines. In August, we had an initial RIPA inspection and a further, more detailed one specifically for Wokingham by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, and we've received positive feedback from that. They've commented that our RIPA procedures are comprehensive, and they've agreed the RIPA policy and confirmed they're happy with the training arrangements. And the report resulted in just 2 recommendations and 1 suggestion, and those are summarised in the report. I'm just moving on now to Appendix A1, which is on pages 61 to 65. Members will be familiar with the format of this appendix. This lists all the audits that have been undertaken, are in progress, or at draft stage, or completed as at the end of September. And when the audits have been finalised, the audit opinion is shown as well. I just finally mentioned that in the cover reports, there were 4 draft reports that were outstanding, and I acknowledged that we'd been working with management to progress those. 2 of those have been finalised now since I prepared this progress report. That's Equalities Data Collection and Recruitment and Safeguarding. And there are 2 others, Reconciliation, where we have a meeting with the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Resources and Assets to complete that one. And for cybersecurity, we're just waiting for this final sign-off by management. So the report is being presented tonight for you to note the progress of audit and investigation activity to the end of Q2.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Right, questions? Okay, well, Councillor Maher, Councillor Kaiser and Mike. Okay, off you go.
Hello, thank you for this very comprehensive report. Just a point of clarification for me, really. On page 57, the table you have and the references 1 to 18, presumably these are the ranking as for the risk. Am I correctly in understanding that?
These are the references in the corporate risk register, so they should relate directly back to the list in the risk register.
So I was just thinking, why are we not auditing anything in 22-23 for what we think is risk element 3 and 4, workforce and uncontrolled development? So presumably these are quite high risks.
Yes, they are. I mean, the key corporate risks. But as I mentioned, it wouldn't be possible with our resourcing to audit all the risks every year. So when I have my discussions during the audit planning process before the start of the year, we work through with directors and CLT where we think audit focus needs to be placed in that particular year. So I'm going through that process at the moment for 23-24 financial year. So areas such as workforce planning will no doubt be included within that plan.
And just to be totally clear, they're not ranked. They're not ranked in order of risk. They're just listed in the same order that they're listed in the risk register.
Yeah.
So Steve, did you want to come in?
I just wanted to support Catherine in what she was saying. So Catherine attends all of our leadership team. So she was at mine today, funnily enough, and we were talking about audits for next year. And certainly what I do as a director is I ask Catherine to focus on things where I think we need to improve and things where I think there might be gaps. So that's certainly an approach I take. So we might have something that is high risk. Our ability, I suppose, to address that might not be as straightforward as it seems to things that we can improve. So, and that's certainly how I inform or certainly speak to Catherine and her team in relation to the things that I, as the director, think these are the things we really need to hone in on because we can make significant improvement on insurance in certain areas.
Thank you. And Councillor Kaiser next, please.
Yes, thank you. I mean, thank you for your report. It's very comprehensive. Disturbing in some ways that we have £16.5 million worth of debt, which is over 30 days. That is quite concerning because the people who has that money obviously could fall into receivership or insolvency. So we could end up writing those debts off. I'm wondering what course of action you recommended because there doesn't seem to be a course of action recommended in your report.
Okay, Graham, did you want to input there on the discussions that we've had?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Councillor, I'd need to have a look at the report in terms of reminding myself where the 16 million is. Often it can be with other public bodies, so isn't as much as a risk. In terms of overall, we understand the feedback from the debtor audit that there was work to do, and actually, as well as reinforcing a number of those areas, such as the way we're working with departments, the accuracy of billing and recovery, we've progressed a restructure of the service. Reshaped the service, and we're currently recruiting into roles. So we've taken a fundamental review of debtors, and I'm very happy in terms of 16 million to try and give you a bit of a breakdown of where that is and give you a little bit of assurance of how much is at risk, if that's helpful.
So that would be very helpful. The other issues that come to the fore is that people holding on to invoices. I'm just hope that we're not. The budget's not driving this, because it's a very dangerous situation when people start putting invoices in the desks and stop paying them, because it comes out as a shock. We've had this before in the past with children's services, where I think one year we got hit with nearly £2 million worth of unpaid invoices for Reading Borough Council for legal services, and so it's pretty important that we don't put too much pressure on the staff to meet their budgets. They should feel comfortable that if they have overspent on statutory services, they can come to you and say, look, guys, sorry about this, but this is where we are. We don't want to be in it at the end of the year. The other issue, which was quite, I would like to see, if possible, we've always been very good at collecting council tax. And that's been very much through the good times. So I expect we may see that changing somewhat as people feel the financial pinch. What I would like to know is what of our debt, how much, and when I talk about debt, I don't mean what we owe other people. I'm talking about the debt that's owed to us. How much of that is, how that is distributed, how much of that is council tax, how much of that is people not paying their fees for their care. That would be a very interesting one to see, because, as I say, we always were very good at, I think we were the top council in the country for a number of years, coming to collect our council tax. So I just wonder where the other debt sits. I've got a sneaking suspicion I know where that is, but it would like to get that confirmed. Thank you.
Is that something you can report back on, Graham?
Yeah, we can provide a breakdown of that debt. We can, and just on council tax, I was going to say interesting is not the right word, but to date, collection for council tax has remained on track and business rates. Surprisingly, because I think we thought there'd be a pressure, and I think we expect that pressure now will rise more steeply, probably just after Christmas. So it's something we're very aware of, and we're working with people like the CAB to make sure together we can provide as much support for people as possible to help them through what's going to be a difficult time. Yeah,
that makes it doubly important to find out where that other debt lies.
Yeah,
because if we're collecting council tax, there is somewhere a hole in a bucket somewhere.
We'll provide that.
Okay, thank you. And to Mike now, please.
Just answering Council Mayor's point, typically, and I'd like to confirm with Catherine, this is what we do, is you might have, say, a programme over 3 years to cover all risk areas, but you do the more risky areas every year, which I assume that would be quite a typical internal audit programme. But the point I was raising, I'm delighted you've got that table in this this report. Sorry, excuse my cold tonight, by the way. In this report where you have the brought forward outstanding issues, the new ones, less the ones closed, equal the carry forward. But I did notice there were 40 new actions, but nothing closed. So that was one question I had. But also in reports I've seen historically, for those high concern, high risk items, reports I've seen before sometimes will get management to comment on how they are resolving those high risk actions, just so the Audit Committee can see that, to be honest, management are taking them seriously. I'm sure we do, but how we're actually mitigating them. So several points there.
Catherine?
Thank you. So in terms of the audit plan, we've tended to move away from having a 3-year audit plan because things change so much nowadays with new risks coming in and others being removed from the risk register. And in the current climate, it's very difficult to plan ahead for 3 years because we don't know what's around the corner. We didn't predict the pandemic and the Ukraine crisis, etc. So what we do is an annual plan at the moment, but some councils have moved away from that even to quarterly plans, just so they can make it as flexible as possible. So that's how we go through our planning process, but obviously picking out the highest risks each time that we can look at.
Just picking up Councillor Myers' point, how is he ensured then that you're covering every risk area?
So in terms of the key corporate risks, the table on page 57 highlights what those key corporate risks are, the 18 risks that are in the corporate risk register. So you'll see over time that we're focusing our work, we're always focusing on those key corporate risks. So some of those key ones may get downscaled in time compared to some of the others. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sorry, I think the point I was trying to make was that risk element, no matter how we state it, 3 and 4. Sorry, let me just get back to page 57. Risk 3 and 4 are not being reviewed. So are they risk 3 and 4? And if they are, should there not be at least some sort of a compliance audit done, if not a substantive one? Something. That's all I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, it's
by not auditing them, does that increase? Sorry, I don't mean to cut across you. By not auditing them in any way, does that mean we're kind of missing something? Or are you really comfortable with risk 3 and 4 that there isn't an issue, as you say, things changing so dramatically?
So those references 3 and 4 are just number references to the risk register. They're not saying they're the 3rd and 4th highest corporate risks in the council. So some of the adult social care ones will come up higher, for example. So we look at them in totality rather than saying one's just the highest one. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
And I'll bring in Andrew shortly out, and also to say that obviously Audit Committee reviews the plan every year before it's finalised, so we get the opportunity to say if we think that audits should be being done in other areas. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say possibly we're sort of conflating two things here, because I think Catherine's right that we need a really agile, flexible audit plan now in the current sort of circumstances. And it is important, particularly at your next meeting, when you consider the plan of proposals for next year, that you sort of have, I think, the discussion that you're having tonight in terms of which are the most important risks. But yeah, over a course of time, I would expect that the audit team would consider certainly those long-term risks that I talked about earlier, that they'd be looking at those at least probably in your terms, Mike, once every 3 years.
Whatever associated period.
Yeah.
So good,
Yeah.
thank you. I think.
Okay, thank you. I just had a couple of questions myself, and I'll come to Councillor G and Councillor Kaiser. So yeah, thank you for the increased detail on the recommendations. I think that's really good. So page 59. So I'm reading this right, that there are currently no high risk concerns that are currently overdue.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So then of the new actions, so the second column there, we've got 5 total open actions that are high risk. And then underneath that says 4 are not yet due and then 0 are overdue. So does that mean there actually is one that's overdue, or is it 5 that are not yet due? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I'll double check that one.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
come back to you if that's all right.
That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. And then also I think with just coming back to what Mike was saying, I'm reading it that there are 2 audit actions that have been closed during the period in that
Yes.
third column. Is that right? So
That's
I think
right.
maybe if that was shown as a negative number, it would help us to sort of to understand the table, if that's all right. But yeah,
Okay.
so 2 have been closed and we've got 14 new ones in total. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Regular 2.
One row that says 156 and one that says 1524, and I'm just wondering why the 1524 isn't the same as the on the row with the 156.
That's because they're the high concerns.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could move it to the second. Could
No. So it says total actions, and it's got high, and it's got 15 audit actions closed 0. But where it says total open actions, it's got 1, 5, 2, and then 4, which is confusing.
Okay. Well, Catherine and I can have a look at that. Yeah, to make sure that's totally accurate. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And the other point I was going to raise. It was just to check. So there've been no finalised audits since the last committee that were category 3 and 4. So the new audit actions in the period, so 5 of those were high risk, but that didn't contribute to an overall rating of 3 and 4. Is that correct? So there were high risk. Sorry, so there were high risk recommendations during the period.
Yes,
but that didn't contribute overall to a high 3 or 4 rating in the overall report. Yeah,
that's right. Because it might have been a small number of high risk ones that didn't fit the definition of the 3 and 4.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly for me on the fraud aspects of your report, I want to know what awareness and training is provided for staff on fraud. There's various fraud awareness weeks and things like that happen over the autumn. So is there regular information provided? It's probably a question for officers rather than Catherine, I don't know, but regular information provided to staff on fraud and the risks of fraud, and to always be, looking out for fraud, etc.
I think if I could take that, I think there is to a point, but it's definitely an area that we need to do more of. So we'll take that away and look at how we can promote, maybe that's the wrong word, we don't want to promote fraud, but how we can promote the awareness internally. So we'll take that as an action, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. So if we take Councillor G and then Councillor Kaiser.
So at the moment we're in quite a lot of turmoil in the economic market. So that means that our assets have to work really hard for us. So we can find on the council website the return on the commercial property assets, but there's no visibility of the return on community assets, if you like. So I'm going around the town centre, and Denmark Street's been purchased. I know that's a commercial property investment, so I can find the return on that online if I type the right thing into Google. But then I can't see things about Peach Place or Elms Field. And for example, as was mentioned in the last full council meeting, the park and ride. These are assets that should be working really hard for us. And I'm very concerned that we've got a lot of unused assets, or underutilised assets, I should say, which could be earning us income. And that's quite a big opportunity cost associated with those assets. We've got them sitting around doing nothing. And I'm just wondering whether internal audit would ever cover something like that. Not wishing to add to your burden, Catherine, because we've already put Treasury Management on there. So where is that visibility, and does it get covered with internal audit? Thank you.
Okay, Steve, did you want to comment on that first, and then we'll go to Catherine?
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to be helpful. So it's a very good question you raised, Councillor. What I can give you assurance on is, as part of the Strategic Growth and Asset Board, we are looking at all of our assets and understanding that through this lens of need that I keep referring to. So whether that be send accommodation, care leaver accommodation, school places, supported living, I could go on forever, social housing, the list is endless really of our needs going forward. So we are absolutely, through a fine lens, looking at our need pipeline versus our asset opportunities. And as part of the organisational foundation programmes, I believe that Susan, as the Chief Executive, looking at the last minute, spoke about last time she was here. One of those strands, and I actually sponsor it from a CLT point of view, is assets. So I work very closely with Sarah Morgan, obviously, who's the Assistant Director of that area, and support Sarah in understanding how our assets do work, how we sweat them, and you're quite right to raise that, and are we making the most out of them? And park and rides is a very good example, because that's certainly a part of the public transport industry that has not recovered and is showing no sign of recovery nationally, not just from a Wokingham point of view. So we absolutely are looking at it very, very closely. And I suppose the last thing to say on that, if you wanted Catherine and the team to come and audit that and look at that and look at what we're doing on that from an assets perspective, I'd be more than happy to welcome Catherine's team in to look at that.
Thank you. So initially, I think I'm looking for visibility of the community assets, the really big assets that we've got. And yes, when Catherine could fit it in, I think that would be good. Obviously, there's probably a big pile up in the schedule. So I think it is a big area. We must have hundreds of £1 million worth of assets that we can sweat, and I want to make sure that we're sweating them. So I think it's visibility first about the income that they are bringing in compared to their market or capital value, and then so visibility first, and then audit how well we're doing at making sure we're working those assets to their potential second. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor G. And Councillor Kaiser.
Yes, really, it's for Graham. I mean, in the report we've got from internal audit, I mean, say it would appear there's a problem or delay in putting charges on people's houses for deferred care payment, and it does says alternative recovery methods are being sorted to ensure the income can be maximised. I'm not quite sure how you do that. I don't know what that means. I mean, if somebody is taking care and we need to take a charge over the house, it would appear that our legal team they've suggested that we do it in some other way, but I'm not clear on that. And of course, these amounts of money can be massive. I mean, we could have people that could be £200,000, £300,000 in care.
You have to forgive me, Councillor. I'll need to go and have a look at the detail. I haven't got it in front of me, but again, happy to have a look at that and get back to you with a bit more of an understanding both of the issue and what we're proposing to do about it.
Okay, and the other thing is, you don't think, have you got an awful lot of unallocated payments sitting around? Because I know dealing with the NHS and people like that is a nightmare, trying to get invoices out. When they're good at spending it, but they're not good at paying it.
No, we it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if there was a corresponding £16 million of unallocated income? But unfortunately, no, we're pretty much on top of those payments coming in and allocations. So I'm sure that there'll be some, but there's not.
Okay, it's not a major problem. That's all I was trying to establish. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the internal audit? No? All right, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last substantive item is the governance statement. So, Andrew, is this you? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just be very brief with this. So back in the summer, you considered and agreed the annual governance statement that will sit with our 2021-22 financial statements. That was a sort of comprehensive document describing the governance arrangements that the council had in place during the last financial year. The report also identified those 7 areas of improvement that we're looking to work on through this year, through 22-23. And on page 74 onwards, you'll see the details as to where we are with each of those 7 areas. You'll see most of the actual actions aren't due yet, but I thought it was opportune just to give you an early sight as to where we're at in terms of each action. And I would just say for this committee in particular, I think the risk number 4, the risk management, is on there. And I think as you've seen through your last few meetings and the training that the committee received last week, I think you're making really positive strides, or we're making very positive strides in terms of improving our approach to risk management. And then I'd also just draw your attention to the 7th item there on the action plan, which is around the SITFA code of financial management. And you'll see there that you'll be receiving a report at your next meeting on that in terms of the council's compliance against that code. And obviously, as we've talked about a lot this evening in terms of sort of the financial risks around the council, it's very important that you receive that assurance that we're in compliance with the code. But very happy, Chair, to take any questions on any of the other items.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from members on that? Councillor Harper?
Just more an observation really on the risk training. I thought it was excellent, and I hope those who aren't on the audit committee got as much out of it as the people on the audit committee. I thought it was very valuable to point out that you don't want to be too risk averse. You want to manage risk rather than being risk averse.
Thank you for that feedback. Any other questions or comments on this item? No. All right. Thank you very much. We'll move on. So the last item is the forward programme. Now you'll see the next meeting for February has 11 items. So I would like to propose that actually we split this up and have 2 meetings if members are happy with that. I think last year there was a March meeting, and I think, you know, to do this justice as we should with the committee, I just don't think we can do all of those items in one evening. So are members happy for me to ask officers to arrange an extraordinary meeting so that we can split the items up?
Agreed.
Yeah. Are you thinking January?
We were thinking March, but
do we? Oh yes, we've only got one more meeting, haven't we? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if officers could look at that and split those meetings up. Any other sort of points on the forward programme or items that should be there that aren't, or anything? Any other comments on that?
The one thing I'd say for if it's going to be a March meeting, that we'll bring the draft annual report from this committee that will go on to council, and I think we do that every year, but I think it's really important this year, particularly in the light of the latest sit for guidance on the effectiveness and audit committees, and making sure that that annual report is the opportunity to explain to the wider council and the public as well in terms of the work of this committee and the value that you're adding as a committee.
Okay, any other points on the forward programme? No, well, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, everyone, all members, and thanks very much to all the officers that have answered all our questions. I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone.